Well, it's the Bronx Bull all over again. I kind of wish I would have done a review of the Bronx Bull back when I saw it, because at the end of that movie I questioned what's the purpose of this movie, why is this so incompetent? And now Gotti came out in theaters and it's just like the Bronx Bull. Almost all the complaints I had with that movie is the same with this one, except the Bronx Bull I saw on Netflix in my own home because we never got it in theaters, and so I had to wait till it came out on DVD, saw it on Netflix. I was safe watching it there. Gotti actually came out in theaters, and I got to see it there. We didn't get American Animals, we didn't get Will You Be My Neighbor, but we got Gotti. So Gotti is this biopic crime drama about a legendary mob boss by the name of John Gotti. And John Travolta plays this character, or this real life person. So what is the movie about? Well, different moments in the life of this mob boss and how he came to be the head honcho of the Gambino family, and eventually to his jail time and his death and things about his son. That's the best way I can describe what this movie is, because honestly, throughout this movie it felt like the movie itself didn't really have a point. Now normally this is the point in the movie review where I talk about the things that I liked about the film, and there are two things I can say good about the film. For one, John Travolta is actually good. I liked him in this movie. He plays your stereotypical mob boss character, and he does it well. Yes, it's stereotype. Yes, there's not a lot of complexity to the character within the movie. Maybe there was complexity to the real life person, but this movie doesn't really show it that well. John Travolta definitely is not the weakest thing in this film. In fact, he is the strongest thing about this film. And so if you're not a John Travolta fan, or you don't think he could play a mobster, you might not like it, but I think he did a solid performance. The other good thing I can say about this movie, it was filmed on a camera. It's an actual film. It got into theaters. Certain shots look competent. There's some good shadow every so often. Some good dramatic lighting from now and then. Most of the time it looks cheap, but it doesn't look as cheap as the Bronx Bull, let me tell you that. Other than that, that's the only good things I can say about this movie. The main actor and the camera work is at least a 2-star rating, in my opinion. You can tell this is not going to be a good movie review. No, Gotti is a bad film, in my opinion. And it is an extremely messy film. I'm going to have to compare it to the Bronx Bull because I had the same exact feeling coming out of this movie that I did seeing the Bronx Bull, where it's just little moments and snippets of his life, but there's really no overall story, no overall arc that is meaningful. Honestly, the movie feels like it has no purpose, and it just feels random and messy and just scattershot. I mean, for instance, let me give you an example of how this movie starts off, because it is really jarring, to be honest. And that's what really got me in the mindset that, wow, this is going to be all over the place. This is going to be exactly like the Bronx Bull, because at the very beginning of this movie, it starts off with John Travolta playing as Gotti, or kind of playing as Gotti, or impersonating Gotti, because it's really weird. It starts off with him in front of the camera talking to us directly that he's John Gotti and this is a great lifestyle to be in, the whole mobster thing, and that there's only two ways out, either through death or being put in jail, and he did both of them, he said, or something like that. It was really weird. And so he's talking to us directly in the camera. Then it cuts to the introduction where we actually get the names involved with the movie, while we get music, and it shows clips of actual footage of John Gotti, like interspersed through the introduction of the movie. Then after that's done, it throws you right into the action where the mob bosses are talking to John Gotti, saying that there's this kidnapping that went wrong. Someone in their family, his son was kidnapped, and when they paid the kidnappers the money, the kidnappers still killed his son, and so now they want John Gotti and all the families looking after this person, trying to find the kidnapper and killing him. And then it cuts to John Gotti walking into a bar, sitting in the shadows, and him sitting in the shadows sounds cool, probably the way I'm saying it, but when he's sitting in the shadows, it looks really dark, and it just looks pretty cheap in this movie. It's not as good as I am describing it, and or at least this particular scene. And there's this guy drinking at the bar. He sees John Gotti, and he keeps drinking, and then these two people come from the restroom or the back of the bar, which are dressed up as cops, and they say, "Well, you're coming with us." And he goes, "Well, I would if you were real cops." And then they grab him and put him down, and then John Gotti walks up and shoots him in the head, and then they leave. And then the next scene, John Gotti is really old, is in jail, he's bald, and looks pretty nasty, honestly. And he's getting wheeled off, Hannibal Lecter style, and brought into this room where he's meeting his son, and the son is talking about a case and wanting to plead guilty so that he could actually be with his family in due time rather than probably a lifetime sentence. And so then it jumps to when John Travolta, or John Gotti, is young but in jail, and why he's in jail, and it's just a mess from then on there. I mean, that's just the first couple minutes of this film. It jumps around so crazy and so awkwardly that it's really hard to follow. Now, throughout the movie, most of the movie, it does go chronological, but it doesn't get until the moment when you see him young and in jail where it really truly starts becoming chronological. And there's almost no point or no rhyme or reason for the jumping back and forth. Occasionally it jumps back to the future with him in the room with his son talking about this case, and throughout the majority of the movie he's narrating, but I could never tell if he was narrating because of him in the future with his son and he's actually telling the story to the son, or if it's because at the very beginning of the movie he was talking directly to us, and that John Travolta, that John Gotti is talking to us, and that's the narration of the scene. And it often throws in real footage of John Gotti and real footage of news, and it's always awkward and it's always really jarring throughout the movie. It does it constantly. And there's no real flow to the scenes. Some scenes just feel random and they'll just end, and it's like, oh, wait, isn't there more to the scene? Oh, I guess we're just done with the scene. Okay, it just ends there. I mean, there's several scenes where I'm just, oh, I guess that scene ended. I thought there would be more to it, but okay. There was several times that happened in the movie where I've just questioned why this scene just suddenly ended. And because there's no overarching story to this movie and it's just his life, there really isn't a flow to these scenes, and it just jumps forward in time so many times that it feels like there's no point to the scenes that you just saw. The Bronx Bull did this, but the Bronx Bull was actually even worse than Gotti. Okay, so at least it's not as bad as the Bronx Bull, but at the same time, it just really felt pointless. when I eventually saw the trailer, I thought, okay, maybe the overarching story is that him becoming in with the mob and then becoming the boss and then eventually going to jail. Sure, that happens. Not until about halfway through the movie. This really is a movie where it feels like things just happen and then it just ends and then we're on to the next thing. And it's really hard to actually keep paying attention to the movie when it's like that. I'm actually surprised there weren't people that left the theater. Like, I've seen far more competent and far more understandable movies out there where people have left the theater thinking it's the dumbest thing they've ever seen. I'm surprised everyone stuck with it with this movie. Another thing that makes this movie so much more confusing than it should be is there's a lot of names in this movie, and a lot of times you don't see the person that they're talking about. They just talk about a person, then you're supposed to remember that name, even though it seems like sort of like a nonchalant discussion about this character. And you're like, oh, maybe we're not really meant to remember this, but you are meant to remember this name so you can put a face to the name, and then the face finally comes later, and I was getting confused who was who in this movie. Rarely does that ever happen. I was getting confused. I did not know any person's name, what they were meant to be, and I was getting confused, and it felt like all the dialogue and everything in this movie was meant for people that know about John Gotti's life, know about the characters involved, and it's almost like it's an inside movie for people, like you're meant to know beforehand before you go to the movie. And I can understand people arguing, well, why, if you don't know about John Gotti, why aren't you seeing this movie? But let's face it, there are movies out there that you just are about people that you've never heard of, and movies should be able to help you understand who a person is, whether you heard about the person or not. For example, there was a documentary, RBG. I'm not political, so I don't know a lot about politics or people involved with that. It was a documentary about someone on the Supreme Court, and didn't know about that person, and kind of was glad to know about that person because of the documentary. This could have been like that for John Gotti. John Gotti, I had no idea who the person was because I was really young when he died, so I don't know too much about him. And even after coming out of the movie, I still don't feel like I know who John Gotti is. Now, there was at least one individual scene that I felt could have been good. It was a scene where John Gotti's, one of his son, dies. And it's an accident, which, honestly, the accident part was actually kind of funny. It was supposed to be tragic, but it didn't even do it right, I feel. Anyway, the son dies, and there's a scene where the older son wakes up in the middle of the night and hears something, so he checks the hallway and looks down the stairs, and John Gotti is in a chair. It's all dark, so you can just see his outline, and he's just sobbing. And that's a pretty emotional scene. I could care less about the kid because it really doesn't give you any reason to care about the family at all. And so I just felt completely emotionless to the characters. But with that one scene, I actually felt a little bit of emotion. But then it's ruined when they just continue to do more. Like, oh, now the mother has to cry, so let's have our stereotypical scene where it's the next day, they hear a crash, and he runs into the room, and the mother has thrown stuff away, and she just goes, ah! Just cries and just bawls her eyes out, and she's like, why? Kind of thing, and falls to the bed, and I'm like, oh, fuck. It wasn't until the end of the movie that I started to realize what the heart of this film might be, and it's about John Gotti and his son maybe going on trial, going to be continually going on trial the same way that John Gotti was, and the son trying to get out of the life. And the problem is, this movie really doesn't establish a relationship with the two. It doesn't establish that motivation. And so when it actually starts happening at the end of the movie, it feels like it comes out of left field, and it's where it's like, oh, now the movie's trying to be a movie. Why didn't you establish any of this beforehand? In fact, there's a lot of things in this movie where it doesn't really establish things, and it just happens, expecting you to actually care and become invested with it when they don't set up anything. Like another example, and this could have been pretty entertaining and could have been unique and could have added a nice spin to the movie, is I guess there was a lot of people that idolized John Gotti because they were showing real news clips of people saying, yeah, he's the man, and talking about how great he was and how good he is to the community, despite the fact that it never establishes him being a part of the community other than being a mobster. And how when him getting arrested, there was riots and people going crazy and like, no, how could they arrest him, and no, he's good for the community. And this all feels like it comes out left field because it never establishes that sort of fandom. It just happens, and it's like, oh, if you were around the time this happened and you saw the news, then here's a little glimpse, here's this so you can remember and be nostalgic for. But if they would have shown his rock star nature, have this fandom and just tried to establish that, maybe it could have put a unique spin to the movie, but it just feels like it comes out of left field. Simply put, this movie is just a mess. There's no real point to the movie, and it feels like it's just so many things at once. It feels like there's been a lot of things cut from it, and a lot of things that they just didn't bother to establish or to make into a plot point, and so it just becomes meaningless. But because John Travolta did do a good job, and he's the only person in this movie that I feel did do a good job, I can't quite give Gotti a 0, even though in my heart I probably should, because this is a really bad, meaningless, terrible, messy movie. But I'm going to give Gotti half a star. So, did you get Gotti? Did you get to see it? What did you think about this generic, meaningless mobster movie that imitates mobster films but doesn't have anything that makes it a good mobster film? And if you did see this movie, what did you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my other movie reviews, my countdowns, whatever else is on my channel. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was just my opinion.